All right, hearing and seeing none, I will ask Ms. Only to call the roll.
Pugh,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes?
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now that brings us to item 3, the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No request for changes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
So move, Madam Chair.
Second.
Pugh.
Thank you.
Barron.
All right, so moved and properly seconded. Anything from the committee on the agenda? All right, hearing and seeing none, I will ask Ms. Only to call the roll.
Pugh,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes?
Barron,
Yes.
Newton. Motion passes.
Great. That brings us to item 4, our items for action this evening. 4A is a motion to direct staff to evaluate current zoning laws that permit zoning designations for large residential developments to remain in perpetuity and present options to reevaluate or rezone if they are not developed within 7 years. Recommendations should include processes to ensure that zoning and the comprehensive plan remain consistent with the lived character of the community. That motion was from Ms. Newton on July 13th of this year. They can be found on pages 10 through 16 of our packet tonight. Since the maker of the motion is here, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, and I'll also ask that staff come and speak to that as well. But the impetus for the motion is that, at least in my area, we have properties that are very large properties that may have been zoned for large-scale development decades ago and then suddenly are being developed. And so what I wanted us to do as the county is to proactively reevaluate those to make sure that we're not doing something based on what might have been right for the past, but that we make sure that any developments match the lived character of the community, whereas things can change in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. So based on my conversations with the staff and advice from legal, it was, well, I'll let them speak to, they wanted to speak directly to my recommendation, so they were calling. So based on advice from legal, we couldn't implement the motion as I had written it, but staff had looked at some processes that they could change to bring that information to council more frequently and in a more visible manner. I don't see those conversations reflected in a briefing document, so I would like for staff to just address that.
Ms. Newton, Brian Crooks, Planning Services Manager. So there's also may have been conversations with Mr. Price as well. But kind of some of the conversations that I've had in relation to this, that I've had with him, and of course ones that we've had, I think in part a lot of what we have discussed in terms of this motion is one, a lot of what we're doing with the code rewrite will take effect in regards to what the motion's intent is and what's being proposed here, is where we're basically able to reevaluate an area as a whole and see what makes sense, what doesn't make sense in terms of the comp plan, the council district as a whole, how it's been developing, the way we want it to develop, et cetera. And so that's part one to, I think, what the motion is trying to get at. So the code rewrite as a whole, we'll be looking at the districts, county, everything as a whole and saying what makes sense, what doesn't. So where we have some of these mismatches with what may have been rezoned 20, 30 years ago, et cetera, we can see, okay, what makes sense in context of what is there now, how this area is developing, and how we want that area to develop. So the remapping process will kind of take a stab at that in part. And then also one of the things that I think we've had some conversations around is being more proactive in terms of the way we think about zoning. So a lot of times it's been very reactionary. Someone comes in, they rezone this piece of parcel or piece of property, 20, 30 acres, 10 acres, 5 acres, et cetera. But then we don't go back and say, okay, well, what about the rest of this area as a whole? Does the rest of the surrounding property make sense, or do we just leave it as is? We've been reactionary to that, where we just said, okay, we'll wait for somebody else to come in, and then we'll do it. So I think in part on staff, we're going to be a little bit more proactive, not reactionary going forward in terms of how we look at areas within the county where we do have a large acreage being rezoned or we have several properties being rezoned, we can go in and say, okay, let's, as staff, go ahead, make a recommendation on what we feel like this should be in conversation with council, planning commission, et cetera, to say, okay, let's take a look at this, let's see what works, and then let's make a recommendation so everything else is able to change in concert versus just this one piece that sits here, nothing else happens. And so kind of part two to that is also, as we are performing our comprehensive plan evaluation, which is done every 5 years, updates every 10. So as part of that evaluation, we can look at and say on a whole scale, how does this area look? We've had a lot of rezonings in this area, part of this proactive process. Go in and say, do we need to make these changes now? Do we need to look at not just the zoning that's in place, but also the comp plan itself and say, okay, does this area still making sense? And so I think that's one of the things that we've identified as developing an internal process, and Mr. Price may be able to speak on some of this also as well, but seeing and looking and seeing, you know, what can we do in that proactive manner, but what are those changes that we need to put in place? What processes do we need to establish so that we're going through and doing that?
Thank you. And I guess from my perspective, you know, the recommendation is that we not take action because those other actions are taking place. But my request that we, and maybe, Mr. Brown, this is something I need to take up with you or take up in a different way, is I understand that the staff is going to be more proactive in terms of how they're bringing this as part of the comprehensive plan. But how does that get instantiated? How does that get documented? Right now, you know, it's at the level of a wish, and I would like to see it more as a level of a policy or something that there's going to be a checklist where people are going to ensure that that's happening, because the problem with things as they're written now is the onus is kind of on us. And, you know, I don't have a 20-year Richland County Council memory because I haven't been here for 20 years. And so whatever the process that needs to happen administratively to institutionalize that proactive process, that is what I would hope would come out of this.
Hopefully, I don't want to duplicate anything that Brian was saying, but from the conversations that you and I've had, Councilwoman Newton, one of the things that we talked about as a staff is, again, is the manner in which we bring things to you and all the information. So to go along with what your actual motion was, one of the things that we looked at is when we come before you and when we go back to reevaluate our comprehensive plan, which we'll review with 5, make any updates.
Starting actually.
Right.
You're starting that process.
Yeah, so as we bring the comprehensive plan to you as a council, and of course to the planning commission, what we'll be looking at is more than just saying, here's the comprehensive plan, y'all have any thoughts? We'll really start looking at areas in which development has taken place, rezonings have taken place, and we'll evaluate, has development actually taken place? Because I think one of your concerns was, we rezone a parcel and it sits there for years upon years upon years. So what we can do as part of the comprehensive plan review is look at those areas of rezoning, which we actually have a lot of that information, and show you what has been rezoned and also what has been developed. And I believe at that time, to go along with what Brian is saying, be a little more proactive. If the area has not begun development, then maybe we need to make some changes to that zoning, maybe even look at the comprehensive plan and maybe scale back from that area and allow development to more trickle out to it as opposed to leapfrogging in certain areas. And I'm sorry, I'm out of shape.
Thank you.
So if I hear you correctly, then this motion is somewhat on pause until we get to looking at the comprehensive plan, more detail?
I wouldn't say necessarily it's on pause. I think as I take it, the motion has been a request to staff, when you come before us with the comprehensive plan, provide better information and show us what has occurred in these areas. And we've taken that, so when we come before you, that is what we're going to provide. We actually have, more present, more information, and, from dealing with all of the council on some of your other requests, we kind of have an idea of what it is y'all are looking for, especially in your area. So we will have a better means to bring that before you so you can make better decisions or in your areas.
So you're taking all of this information into consideration as you write or create revisions to the comprehensive plan?
Yes. And I want to make sure, as we make these revisions, yes.
As we.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. At this time, is there any action that we need to take on this?
I'm making eye contact with.
Okay.
No, for the purposes of this conversation, I heard you clearly, Ms. Newton, about between the end goal and the steps along the way. You want to basically codify the steps along the way as we move to the end goal to get to where Gio is speaking. So I don't think that requires action, Madam Chair. It is clearly understood.
But then I guess my only question then, because now that, would it be appropriate, or would the most appropriate thing be, do we need a motion for that, or how will that information come back before us, this codification?
Yeah, I think as a part of our conversations, Ms. Newton, just in general, I think it's cleaner if there is a motion. I was just speaking to the fact that I don't require it to take action, but it would be cleaner for anybody who is trying to follow this after our conversation today. So to communicate how this comes back and when you want it to come back to the committee.
In that case, I don't know if that's I would make a motion that staff work to codify the proactive processes that were discussed today, and then they can bring them back to this body, understanding that takes into account what we're doing with the Land Development Code rewrite and our future updates to the comprehensive plan. So that's my motion.
That's a lot, but I second it.
Been moved and properly seconded.
And I think what we were just discussing is, I think one of the things we can do is we can kind of incorporate this policy and make it part of our comprehensive plan on how reviews will take place. And so I think that's what you're kind of looking for, so it is part of the policy.
Thank you. And so I'll just leave the word, codification there, and I'll let you codify it in all the places that you think make sense. Thank you.
Mr. Okay. Okay, it looks like we're ready to vote.
Pugh,
Yes.
Horatio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Item 4B is the Division of Solid Waste and Recycling, Richland County Code of Ordinances, Chapter 12 rewrite. That can be found on pages 17 through 104 of our packet for this evening. Is there a motion regarding this item?
I have questions, but I'll make a motion to approve it for discussion.
Second.
Ms. Newton, you're right.
Thank you. So staff may be surprised and or delighted to know that I'm ready to support this. I do just have two simple questions, and I'll go ahead and ask them while whoever is going to address them walks down to the podium. One question that I have was really simple, and it's about the backyard pickup service that we provide to disabled persons. As I read the policy again this time, it appeared to say that in order to get that service, you have to live next door to a relative, which seemed interesting. So did I interpret that correctly? And if so, could you explain that?
Yes, ma'am. There are kind of two aspects of enhanced service that would be provided and is provided to those with a handicap. One is that they can get the enhanced service at no extra charge. The 1.8 multiplier does not apply to them. The other one is that if they do live next to a relative and they they can basically use their relative's roll cart and be exempted from the fee, I believe.
Okay, and actually, it's on page 35 for those who are looking. It's section 1230A. So what you're saying then is there are two options. One option is I'm just disabled and I live where I live and someone comes, and then another is that I'm able to kind of join on with a nearby relative?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay, I'll check that again before it comes to council just to make sure I think it reads clearly. And then my second question that I have is page 42, which is the page 42 of our agenda about enforcement. I don't have a problem with anything that's written here, but what I'm wondering is, are there any opportunities that we have where we can strengthen some of the enforcement? Because in my area in particular, I get a lot of complaints about big trucks that are headed to landfills who themselves are causing more litter than others. And so as we work on keeping our communities beautiful and preventing littering, I just wonder if there's something that we can do to make it stronger. And that's not going to stop me from moving this forward, but I would love for us to address this if we could before it was finally approved.
Yes, ma'am. Understand, most of the enforcement provisions in here were brought forward from the existing ordinance, but we can certainly look at that, right now and going forward. There's a requirement that loads be covered.
Right.
And we can certainly speak with our refuse control officers and our solid waste staff, and if they have additional recommendations, we'd be glad to bring them forward. Our goals are the same.
That would be great, and I guess I would just ask maybe between now and when this comes to full council, if you could have those conversations, and then maybe, if nothing else, if you could follow up with me.
Yes, ma'am.
Just so if there's additional language that I needed to propose, but I just think it's a huge concern, and I would hope we could address it here.
Yes, ma'am. Understand, certainly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ms. Barron, sorry.
Not a question, but a statement. I spoke to a constituent on my way here today and was concerned about our new policy, quote unquote, of having to bag or box. And I felt so happy to report that that was not the case.
Yes, ma'am. You are correct. We had initially brought that forward as a recommendation, but changed it based on our conversations.
Yes, and so to that point, I want to thank you again, because an entire community was on a conference call to tell me about the bag and box challenge that they were having. And so, resounding, we were able to say, you don't have to do that, just get it.
Yes, ma'am. We do leave language in there that encourages it, but it is not a requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, seeing no further discussion, Ms. Only, will you call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Pugh,
Yes.
Horatio,
Yes?
Barron,
Yes.
English, Newton.
Newton, yes.
Motion passes.
And welcome, Ms. English.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Eversman. So that brings us to 4C. Move to invite the Richland County Conservation Commission to present the Lower Richland Tourism Plan to council. That was by Newton and English on November 16th of this year. That information is on pages 105 through 414, so a healthy amount. I guess, do we want to take a vote? Do you want a motion first?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
would you like me to talk to you about why this item is before you?
Please do.
Okay, and I'll be brief so you can give plenty of time to the presentation.
Okay.
So, as a part of County Council's ordinance, you have under your boards and commissions, and basically in the general section, Chapter 2-236, these items related to Conservation Commission. There are several other organizations you have, but this is specific to conservation. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a long section, but I'm going to read the areas I think are pertinent. So under Section 7, it says, Plan for Protection, List of Significant Resources. The Commission shall prepare and submit annually to the County Council a plan for the protection of significant resources in the county. Such plan shall include a list of significant natural, cultural, or historical resources in the county which are recommended to the County Council for acquisition, lease, or development. A financing strategy shall accompany each recommendation with emphasis on being placed upon minimizing the utilization of public monies and maximizing the utilization of other sources such as grants, public donations, etc. And then when you kind of skip over toward the under 7 down to 8, under D, it says the Richland County Council may adopt the list of significant resources submitted by the commission in whole or in part, and may add to or delete additional properties and significant resources submitted by the commission. This list shall be reviewed and, if necessary, amended not less than annually by the commission. So in general, this is before the county council as a part of your ordinances, which speaks to the commission, which allows you to share or hear from them what they believe to be important in preserving the resources that they oversee, and allows you to then give input as to whether or not the methods that they're using, the areas that they're focusing on, align with what you have in play in your mind as a county council. So that's really why this is before you. This plan is kind of part of them presenting to you information they believe the council should accept as they try to conserve land in Richland County. So hopefully that's not too much, but that is based on your ordinance.
Thank you. And Mr. Brown, I don't know if you or another staff person would also want to address part of the outcome of this presentation in terms of incorporating it into the master plan, if approved.
Right. So I'm not sure if that, certainly if that is the will of the body, that's not a problem. Mr. Jensen, were you going to speak to that?
Yes.
ACA Jensen, Madam Chair, is going to speak to that. Thank you, Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. With your permission. Thank you. Assistant County Administrator Eric Jensen for the record. Very simply, there is a universal process for land use adoption and for actions when it comes to acquiring property, disposing of property, and so forth. The county has adopted such a policy or policies, and one of those policies is that the council is that certain actions need to include information contained in a master plan, a general plan, or a comprehensive plan that is adopted by the county. And so it is proper and fitting for the council to incorporate all or elements of this document if you decide to eventually approve it, so that in future actions, whether it's acquiring property, disposing of property, somehow designating or allocating assets for the improvement or the management of the property, that you have a foundation upon which to render your action. So that is why it is requested that should you agree to accept this document in some form or another, that you incorporate the appropriate elements of it into the comprehensive plan and other action plans so that you can take action in the future.
Thank you.
I'm John Craigo, Chair of the Richland County Conservation Commission. Is it possible to bring up the slides, or do y'all have a copy of the slides, not the 176-page handout? Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, so this is the Lower Richland Tourism Plan. It was approved by the Conservation Commission in June of 2018, and I'll note quickly that we dedicated that to the memory of SC House Representative Joe Neal. The next slide, please. Then we engaged the consulting firm Asakura and Robinson in 2016 to put together a concept plan to promote tourism in Lower Richland. We had public input sessions in the fall and winter of 2016, 2017. We also interviewed stakeholders and talked to elected officials and coordinated with a steering committee. The final draft was prepared by June of 2018, and in the following month, the plan was approved by the Conservation Commission, and we made a request to Council for a motion to approve the plan in February of 2019. Next slide. Okay. The plan has three major themes. The first theme is that Lower Richland needs to develop tourism infrastructure. An example that was cited frequently there was that Congaree National Park had just had record visitation of 160,000, and that there was no tourism infrastructure to support visitors to the park. There's other concerns that could be addressed there, but that was an example that came up again and again. Theme 2 was that it's Lower Richland residents who should be involved in the development of tourism infrastructure, and not just outsiders. And Theme 3 was that a successful tourism plan for Lower Richland should focus on small business development, heritage tourism, and nature tourism. And we'll talk about each of those in turn. Apologize for the occasional pause. I stutter some. The framework plan identifies major and minor hubs. It places a nature center hub at Mill Creek and potentially a Lower Richland Small Business Development Center and Lower Richland Heritage Center near Hopkins. That was just in this plan specifically. It placed minor hubs at Eastover, Gadsden, Cabin Branch, and Gateway Hub, and also had gateways placed around the periphery of the area. In addition to points of interest, it had plans for the corridors, which included the outstanding road network, the Palmetto Trail, which runs along Fort Jackson and down along the edge of, or between McCord's Ferry Road and the Wateree River, as you see there. The blue trails, both the Congaree River and the Wateree River are designated blue trails, and possibly a rail trail, though there's no immediate potential for that taking place. Next slide, please. We'll step through the recommendations for each of the three areas next. For nature tourism, the plan advocated for minor tourism hubs at Gadsden and at a couple of gateways, Pinewood Lake Park and the intersection of Old Bluff Road and Bluff Road. Interpretive and training courses for guides and outfitters, and to develop interpretive trails linking nature and heritage sites, and that the Mill Creek Nature Center could complement Congaree National Park. These are both floodplain properties, but much of Congaree National Park is federally designated wilderness, and that really cuts down on the types of infrastructure you could have there. You have more flexibility in terms of camping and lodging facilities at the Mill Creek property that the county owns. And then finally, you can have Blue Trail access at Mill Creek to the Congaree River Blue Trail, and at Wateree Heritage Preserve and Wildlife Management Area on the Wateree River Blue Trail. And improvements should be made to the Palmetto Trail to try to link it to the Lower Richland Tourism Plan. Next slide, please. In terms of heritage tourism, recommendations were to include Lower Richland in South Carolina's National Heritage Corridor, to leverage existing resources. Here's the Circa Lower Richland Heritage Corridor Visitor's Guide and the Kawasaki Basin Tour Guide put together by SCDNR. To improve interpretive trails, help existing nonprofits like Circa with development, develop a wayfinding system of signage, look into rails and trails and Palmetto Trail improvements, as mentioned earlier, and develop a Lower Richland Heritage Center that was proposed at Hopkins Green, and it was thought that it would be difficult for that to be a standalone facility, and so they'd like to partner with the county library and potentially have an outdoor event space there as well. And then help the city of Eastover with historic building rehabilitation or adaptive reuse of historic buildings, and continue a Lower Richland oral history project. Next slide, please. There are three different themes for small business development. Recommendations across, or one recommendation across all three themes was that there be education programs and financing options for local residents. Specifically for lodging and accommodations, there was a big emphasis on starting small with a shared economy training program and shared economy small loan program. They were focusing specifically on B&Bs and Airbnbs, that aspect of the shared economy. Okay, and they also advocated for RV and lodging options at Mill Creek and elsewhere. Next slide, please. the next slide's about food service and production. The idea there was that you could have a commercial commission at the small business, a commercial kitchen at the small business incubator. That was envisioned as being near Hopkins Green. Catering and restaurant facilities at hubs, perhaps, and along that same theme of starting small, not necessarily starting a restaurant, but working from a commercial kitchen. They also advocated for food trucks, and they recommended that zoning should be adapted to facilitate restaurants. And as we know, with the new land development code, we've made steps in that direction. Next slide, please. Agriculture and food production, they recommended a farm-to-table branding campaign, recommended a farmer's market, educational and training programs for specialty farming as opposed to large-scale farming, and a farmer's co-op and refrigeration hub. Next slide. And toward the end of the document, they had a grid that included detailed recommendations for a long list of proposed projects to promote sustainable tourism. They include the funding and phasing of each of the proposed projects, resources and partners for major tourism and small business development projects, and the estimated cost over 10 years was between $17 million and $24 million. In the next slide, progress since 2019. Most of this has been specifically, or some of this has been geared toward the Lower Richland Tourism Plan, but I'd say that a lot of it was incidental progress by other agencies and county offices. So we made the request for council approval of the Lower Richland Tourism Plan. We've been working on the replacing the bridge that was damaged by the large February 2020 flood on the Mill Creek property, and plan to spend. We've already approved almost $300,000 for design work, and of course, replacement of the bridge will cost more. There have been improvements made to the Palmetto Trail and the lake along the Wateree River. There are plans to finally develop that section. The Land Development Code, of course, has new zoning classifications and new uses that are amenable to the goals of the plan. The Hopkins Magistrate Office by itself, it's not clear how that would fit into the plan, but it is county space that's being used, and it could be integrated into the plan, at the very least, as an access point for a greenway, for instance, or an exercise trail or nature trail. Pinewood Lake Park Pollinator Garden has helped expand the mission of that property. The Congaree Biosphere region has brought together some new partners of not just Serco and Congaree National Park, but it's pulled in some folks from Eastover that the park hasn't really worked with before, and the Central Midlands Council of Government is one of the major partners in that effort as well. And then the Southeast Sewer and Water expansion, of course, would permit some of these ideas we're talking about, I think particularly with respect to lodging and RV and camping facilities to be realized. And we've consistently made capital improvement project requests to help fund the Lower Richland Tourism Plan. And then the last slide. Yes?
Oh, that's the last slide?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just wanted to check in.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Jensen has already addressed this, but the plan is to have y'all approve to forward the plan to County Council for adoption, have the council adopt the plan, so it will actually be a county plan as opposed to something that the Conservation Commission happens to call a plan. And then at that point, we bring it to the Planning Commission to have it incorporated into the County Comprehensive Plan. And if council adopted it, then we'd be able to use resources of other county divisions and departments to help implement the plan. And myself or Quentin are happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the body? Council members? Welcome, Ms. Walker. Thank you for presenting the plan to council and for pointing out the vast number of tourists and go to the Congaree National Park, and then they leave and they take their money without having an opportunity to spend it to enrich the community. The park is actually located. Looking at your presentation, I'm just not aware, you said that you made a request for council approval in February 2019. I'm not aware of that, so I guess I wanted to note that. But one of my questions may not be for you. It may actually be for staff in terms of looking as we incorporate this plan. This is huge. There are many steps and many different components to each part. And so I guess my question, from an obligation perspective is there may be things where with additional feedback from the community, things might change or different things might want to be prioritized. And so I guess just from my knowledge, presuming that the plan is incorporated as part of our master plan, does that mean, every comma, semicolon, and dash verbatim is written, or is it more of a conceptual adoption and agreement to the goals of the plan, and that as it makes sense with county resources and priorities and budgets that we'll pursue it? Does that make sense, Mr. Brown?
It does make sense. And the way you communicated it, that would be the way I would view it. But I think that's something when you vote on it that you would want to make clear, because your intent may not be carried over without that expression made. So as a part of the conversation, a part of the potential vote, I would say that so that way the commission and staff would know that it's not line by line, that we will automatically begin to prioritize everything, as included in the written plan, because to your point, there are other plans that the county is considering that may fold into this. It may help you prioritize things. So that would be, I believe, an important part of the conversation for you all to decide as a committee and as a council.
My next question, from a process perspective, because obviously there are a lot of funds that are required from this, is within the statute and the authority that the Conservation Commission has in terms of implementing this, what things can the commission just go do on their own, and what things come back to the county for approval, if you could address that process.
So once you approve this and the commission Mr. Grego, he's here, I'm going to call the commission, Mr. Grego just communicated, once you approve the plan, the idea is no longer just a commission plan. It is now a county plan that the commission is implementing. So from the commission standpoint, they have funds that they can carry out as much and as far as they feel like they can do with their funding, separate and apart from the county, but then their understanding would be that the county would then partner along with additional funding to continue to move that down the line. So anything that the commission has funds for that have been approved by the county, they can move forward with. Anything that would require additional funding from the county, then the commission would think that because it has been approved in the plan, that the county will be following up with additional resources because it would have been approved as a part of the county plan.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm gonna try to tag Ms. Newton, and that is this is a comprehensive plan, and I would hate for the county to sign off on something that is not attainable or not priorities into some case. I would like to see that the commission would package this in a manner that is, these are the things that we feel as though it's pressing. These are the things, the big picture items for us to accomplish, because I could see where, when I read this, I was like, wow, we're going to do all of this, and there's so many other things that still need to be done here in the county. So as we think to move forward with this document, I would like to see us somewhat streamline it to, if we're going to marry it with other comprehensive plans, to streamline it to connect to big picture items.
Yeah, just a quick response to that. I think you'll note that when the plan list items that can be done right away, they tend to be cumulative, and so they talk a lot about the branding and wayfinding, partnership building, and those sort of things. So, I mean, I would say the first year or so of goals wouldn't cost that much at all, and then we could see where we go from there. And there are opportunities to leverage things too. We already mentioned being able to use the magistrate office is possible, as possibly the gateway to a greenway. Perhaps trying to leverage a library branch to be partnered with a heritage center. And, yeah. But at the end of the day, I mean, the budget was $17 to $24 million over a 10-year period.
Follow up?
I did. And I understand where you're coming from. And 17 to $24 million in the scheme of things may seem real small for, but when you speak, you say can be done. Well, we possibly could do these things. When I would like to see more concrete information, because there's lots of wiggle room with a can be, with a maybe, and so I'm not going to belabor the point, but I just really think that this is important and we want to get it done, but I want us to be realistic in what we can do and what we can accomplish. I'm not a big fan of saying, well, let's do this now and then we'll revise it later. Let's set the plan now as to what we can do, and once we check all those boxes off, then let's go back and create another plan. Yeah. It's really loose at this point for me.
Yeah, and that will be part of our annual work plan each year, which we hope to submit to council at the start of 2022, and so there will be the opportunity to see what we have planned each year, and that will be very concrete.
Are you okay? Well, I think, just apart from resources, there's just a lot to do, and we want to make sure we're going about everything strategically. When before this motion was made, one of the things that we went back and forth on was, should it be a motion to come, before council? Should it be a work session? And so initially I was proposing a work session, but then in conversation, with the vice chair and chair, it kind of said it came back to presenting it here. But based on some of those questions, it certainly could be that a work session is needed, and that was something that I envisioned. I do think that there are a lot of questions that we need to flesh out, and so if that would please the body, we can certainly have a substitute motion to do it that way. Ms. Barron's eyes look like they're requesting a substitute motion. But is there any other discussion? I have a hard time seeing around corners. I don't know if there's anything that Ms. English wants to add before. I haven't. Ms. English, just wanted to check in with you.
Thank you all. I think I'm pretty good. I really like the idea of a working plan. I like the idea of a 10-year period, which gives us date points, and it allows us to go back and forth and reevaluate. I've just seen a lot of things, and this is my community, 45 years proud, and just really excited to see those things there. I do understand the need for us to have a more concrete based approach, but at the same time, I love the idea of the working plan, because nothing is ever in stone, especially in my district where we are putting in sewer and water and we have to make sure all of those things are in place. So things can change as this plan is developed and as things are implemented. So thank you so much for the work that you guys put into this. I really do like it.
Thank you.
Ms. Malinowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed all your figures throughout the report end with 2017. That's 4 to 5 years ago. The last 2 years, there have been a lot of lifestyle changes, I would think, and I do believe I'd like to see some other updated figures, because I think those may tend to decline rather than increase from that point in time through today. That's number one. Number two, there's a lot to read here, and I primarily skimmed it, but I didn't see anything in here that shows our return on investment. I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to comment quickly, I mean, I know one figure I could update. The report was enthusing about a visitation of 160,000. This past year at Congaree National Park, they're not just going to break their visitation by a small margin. They're going to break it by 35%. There's going to be 215,000 people who visited the park. Just in terms of the sort of impact it could have, I'll note that when the national park, when it does surveys of its visitors, it finds they stay in the Columbia area for 1.6 days. They're not staying in Lower Richland, and so that's money that could be invested in Lower Richland if the infrastructure was there. The economic impact annually from the park was $9 million 2 years ago. With all this increased visitation, I'm sure it'll be a lot more. So that gives you a sense of the type of impact the plan could have.
Briefly, because I know we're running out of time, I do think that the economic impact that we could have is huge. What I think from a procedural perspective, I move that we hold this item in committee while we schedule a work session. And I move that way because an official county motion isn't actually required for a work session. That's something that can be scheduled. So that is my motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this? All right, hearing and seeing none. Ms. Olney, will you call the roll?
Pugh,
Yes.
Horatio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Yes, Mr. Pugh.
I would like to thank the Conservation Commission for coming and giving us an overview of what their plans are. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
We have one more item on the items for action. That's 4D, Richland County Conservation Commission Cabin Branch Property Purchase. That's on pages 415 through 454 of our agenda this evening. We can start out with a motion. Does anybody want staff to speak to this? It would be great if staff could briefly. Yes, could we have, thank you, before you get all the way in your seat. Thank you.
Quentin Epps with the Conservation Division. The Conservation Commission requests that County Council approve a purchase agreement for 60 acres of land adjacent to existing county-owned property for conservation purposes. This purchase will be funded by the Conservation Commission. It'll include a couple of budget transfers to get the money all into acquisitions, but it'll be about $312,000 for 60 acres, and it's a piece of property that's in between two pieces of property that we already own, and that's the appraised value that we're getting it for, plus the cost of the closing. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you for bringing that to us. I think it's an excellent opportunity to continue to conserve land in that area, and I move to approve.
Second.
Properly seconded. I just have one question regarding this one is, the purchase of a piece of property is one thing, and then we have ongoing responsibilities associated with that. Have we kind of anticipated what that would look like?
Yes, because we already own about 600-plus acres in that same area, the additional maintenance costs and upkeep are going to be very minimal, because it's 60 acres in addition to the 700 that we own right there in the same area. So there's not going to be a lot of additional maintenance costs.
Thank you so much. Okay, any other discussion? All right, hearing and seeing none. Ms. Olney?
Pugh,
Yes.
Horatio,
Yes?
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So much. That brings us to item 5. We have one item pending analysis. The motion to direct the county attorney to work with the county administrator to research and draft an absentee landlord ordinance. I think we're making some progress on that one a little bit. Ms. Newton, did you want to speak to it?
Yes, at our last meeting, staff presented a schedule for them to come back to us and present what their proposals are. So we're on track to do that for early next year.
Great. Okay, and then that brings us to item 6, adjournment.
Done?
Second?
Second.
Great. It's been moved and seconded for adjournment. Ms. Olney?
Pugh,
Yes.
Horatio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,